Edward, thank you so much for coming on to this interview. I frequently tell people we were at school together, and I don't tell them the truth, which is we're several decades apart, because I'm rather hoping that they'll assume I'm the same age as you are, but it never works. Anyway. But at least we grew up in the same ethos and milieu, so that always offers a bit of sort of mutuality. We know where we come from.
Exactly, we do indeed.
You've been doing something really, very exciting and exotic. You've been a Vatican correspondent. Before we talk about contemporary things, can you tell us a little bit of what it was like? How much it was boring and how much exotic? I in my own head, I see Rome full of piazzas and cafes with people like you sitting down with cardinals in their dark glasses, plying them with whatever it takes to get them to spill the secrets, and eating and drinking and having. I don't suppose it was all like that. What was it like?
Yes, no, it is. I mean, as a job for a journalist, it's probably the best you can have, in a sense. I've often said this. John Allen, as everyone knows, who writes for Crux, he's always said that too. It's probably the best beat for a journalist you could have, because it combines obviously the faith, it combines faith with everything that's going on in the world today, politics, economics, social events, everything that sort of affects human beings, human nature, human society. And so it's always fascinating. It's a fascinating beat to be on. And of course, you're dealing with the truth of the faith, the one true faith, in connection with all of these issues. So it makes it all very interesting. And yes, it is very nice to live in Rome, and to be there, and to be so close to it, and to be very close to the sort of hub of where it's all happening. The Caput Mundi, of course, as Rome used to be known, and is still, really, in many ways. And so, yes, it's interesting in that point of view. And of course, you meet often a lot of the leading church figures. You take some of them out to lunch and occasionally, and things like that. So it's and you try to get a feeling for the pulse of what's going on there. And so that was also interesting. Then, of course, there was real wonderful perks as well, which I haven't done lately, but like going on the papal trips to foreign exotic places, and being up close with the Pope and following him around to those visits, and really getting a sense of what the papacy means to millions and millions of people, what the church means, what the faith means, and how important it is, and really how central it is, of course, to so many people around the world. So it really is a real privilege, the whole work that one does as a Vatican journalist, and one's very conscious of that and very grateful for it.
And the press corps, very often the people that Pope Francis used to make some of his most important pronouncements to. Were you on the plane at that "Who am I to judge" moment? That was really one of the most seminal announcements that the Catholic Church has made for a long time.
I wasn't on that one. I started going on the trips, I think it was about 2016, when there'd just been the Brexit decision. And we switched the next day. We took off to Armenia, which is interesting because it was the first Christian state, of course, in the world.
Yes.
And I got to ask Pope Francis a question about Brexit, which was interesting. I mean, his answer wasn't very clear. I mean, it was a bit of a very political answer. He didn't come down one way or the other, but it was interesting to hear his view. And yes, it was interesting to be able. It was a real privilege to be able to put that to him the day after the vote. So yes, it was very interesting.
I've just been talking to Jacob Rees-Mogg on another matter, and was asking him about Pope Francis, and I was surprised. He said, "Well, first of all, we're never to criticise the Pope when he's in office, because we don't do that as Catholics." But he said, "The moment they're dead, they're history, and one can talk about history." So I'll talk about Pope Francis from a historical point of view, which I thought was quite neat, if close to the bone. And he was pretty direct, saying, the last thing we ever need from a pope is ambiguity. I wasn't impressed. I'm not asking you to say the same thing, but two things, I think. First of all, you were close to him. One can tell quite a lot about a person from their body language, I think, and their eyes and the expressions that flit across their face, which is why I go around in dark glasses. But what did you? First of all, what did you think of him when you were in his environs, and what do you think, looking back, speaking historically now, about that period?
Well, it's interesting to say that, Gavin, because I always noticed on those trips, when you're up close with the Pope Francis, you get a real sense of him, obviously. But what I found particularly interesting about being close to him is that, at least I got a sense that he was absolutely, totally convinced that what he was doing was right. There was nothing. There was no sort of sense of, have I done this correctly, or am I really quite sure about what I'm doing? There was real sense of conviction with him that what he was doing was right.
So ambiguity was for everybody else, but not for him.
You could say that, yes. And it made him obviously very happy and chirpy during the trip. I mean, during those interviews, he was quite happy. Obviously, took as many questions as he wanted. Obviously, towards the end, he started only taking questions about the trip, and anything else was put aside or delayed until the end. And then, of course, there wasn't time to ask him those questions. But up until then, yeah, he would answer them. But yeah, that was the sense I got from him, and he was very, very pleasant to us journalists. I mean, he came around as the popes do. And he always did. Came round after takeoff, and met us all one by one and shook our hands.
Oh, really? Oh, that's lovely.
Very, very gentlemanly in that sense. Yes. And it was it was good to see him up close like that.
So, how did you find the papacy? I mean, I found myself talking about him as really a first-rate university chaplain, the kind of person you'd want in a university, asking the right kind of questions in a provocative way, leaving a lot of openness for people to come on board. Toto, indeed. I wasn't convinced that was what we needed in a pope, but how do you're a convert too. How do you look back and see that period? Did it cause you any trouble? Were you invigorated? Did you like his appointments? How did you find his encyclicals? You must have had to present them to people. What was your impression?
Well, I think, like you, Gavin, I mean, obviously we came into the faith knowing, at least, what we like about the faith particularly, of course, is the certainties and the teaching, and the solidity of the teaching, and the fact it's all based on divine revelation and comes not from man but from God. And then Francis, of course, threw that up a bit and made a mess. Sort of added a few things which didn't seem to be, of course, from divine revelation. They didn't seem to be based on that, and of course that it made for interesting journalism. Obviously, it made for lots of stories, lots of interest. But from a personal faith perspective, it was unsettling, and I think one could honestly say frustrating, because that wasn't. And also it became very political with Francis. And I often said, I went into Catholic journalism because I wanted to help evangelize, used Catholic journalism to help evangelize, to spread the message of the gospel through one's writing, through reporting on church matters, and really to bring the faith and the issues of the faith into to intersect with, as I said earlier, with politics, with social issues, and to use that and try and evangelize like that. But with Francis, it became so much more introspective and very politically based. And so it was very much about, disputes within the church, internecine disputes, real conflicts, rather than going out and bringing the faith and the beauty of the faith. And that was the wonderful thing about reporting on Benedict, for example. You were reporting on his wonderful preaching, which was evangelizing in itself, because it was so clear, it was so rational, it was so anyone could understand it. whereas with Francis, as I say, it became very political and inward-looking, and that was disappointing. I think, of course, it made for interesting stories, but it wasn't what I went into this field for.
No, I can imagine that. So, Leo, Pope Leo the XIV, is he going to be Benedict the XVII or Francis II? What's your take on it?
A good question, Gavin. I think a mixture of both. I think that's the best way to look at him at the moment.
That's interesting.
I think there was definitely a move to get him elected by the majority of the cardinals in the College of Cardinals, who were chosen by Pope Francis to have Pope Leo, because they saw him as a continuity figure. And I think that's why he did so well in the election, because at least this is what I've heard, that I think almost all of the picks of Pope Francis chose him. They saw him as this continuity figure, somebody who would bring forward the Francis revolution, if you like, while at the same time pacifying everyone else. So in that sense, yes, he's certainly a sort of Francis Mark II. But
you're the author of the great book on the matter. I mean, presumably he appeared after you'd written the book. At least, I mean, he was quite late to being a cardinal. He was only appointed a few years before. Did you have any idea that this was the dark horse? Was there any sense in advance that he was the heir apparent?
Only towards the end. None of us really thought he had a chance, because he was an American. He'd only been a cardinal for less than 2 years. He'd been in the Curia less than 2 years. And I think, and he wasn't that well known. Yes, on paper there were many things, obviously, that went in his favor. But I think he was a little bit of a sort of stealth candidate. I think he was pushed forward by Pope Francis quietly. I think that was probably true. I think those around Pope Francis wanted him there to succeed him. But they kept it very quiet, and we still don't know exactly what it was that appealed to those who are sort of close to Francis on so many issues, except that he was somebody who, as I said, could pacify the very fractious sort of divisions that had grown up under Francis, and try to bring peace.
I've got a theory which I'd like to try out on you. I mean, what do I know? You're the pro. I've come very late to the party. I wonder, and I'd like this to be true. So I'm easily persuaded of my own argument. I mean, I wonder if, as you quite rightly say, he looked like a Francis II. He was promoted by him, and my goodness, he was a bishop in South America. How much more like him can you be? And therefore, immediately engaged in all the sympathies of what it was to be a Latin American Christian, and he's quite clearly a man who knows how to run an organization. He'd been head of the Augustinians for some time, but when I listen to him and look at him, I feel very hopeful. I hear the words he uses and the phrases he uses, and they're unambiguously orthodox. I mean, they're as unambiguously orthodox as some of the other sides' progressive language is unambiguously progressive. And then his body language tells me that it looks like he really means this stuff. Francis's body language wasn't always convincing. There was a degree of lackadaisicalness about it. I thought maybe he was just tired. That's okay, but there's a focus to Leo. And if you've fallen in love with St. Augustine and never fallen out of love with him, then that's a kind of defining characteristic too. I think it's much harder to be a radical Augustine than it is to be a radical Jesuit. And the fact that he's done nothing appeals to me, because the Pope does have to do as little as possible, and he does have to bring as many people as possible. And I've said to myself, and my traditional friends get cross with me or impatient with me at this point, but of course he's not leaping to our side, because he's got to bring the other side along a bit without causing schisms and fractures and fury and party spirit. So it is to our disadvantage. But if he's going to turn out to be a Catholic Pope, then we have nothing to worry about. We can afford to take time. It will come right in the end. I find myself really still quite optimistic, and I've been. I wrote an article on this. Taylor Marshall saw it and said initially he thought, "Oh, Ashton's a Pope-splainer," which I think is a very rude phrase, and then sort of came half round to my argument, which was based on the fact that if he'd said given Father James Martin any encouragement at all, it would have been there in Technicolor, black and white, underlined 3 times. The fact that was silence when Father James Martin explained how he wanted an LGBT++ policy in every diocese, parish, church, and cathedral. The silence in this case did not, as in A Man for All Seasons, betoken consent. What's your view on this? The pedigree which you've described beautifully, and the fact, how he's behaved since he was elected. How do you see the inner man?
Well, I agree with you in many ways, Gavin, because I do think that everyone was aware, even those close to Francis, that it was a very tumultuous time. It was a very divisive time, and I think there was a willingness to. I heard this even from Father James Martin, who said, we don't want another Jesuit who's going to be like that sort of thing. And so I think everybody wanted that sort of figure, a pacifying figure, and so I think that's what we have. But I do think we have to give him more time. I do think we're just coming out of the summer now. He's in Castel Gandolfo today. He's still on his sort of holiday break. He's still taking stock of things, taking account of what he needs to do and so forth. And there's such a lot to do. And it's probably, I was saying to somebody the other day, in all of history, obviously there were serious times to be Pope, but I think it's probably one of the most challenging times to be a Pope, just because of the internal crisis within the Church at the moment.
The crises are huge. I was with a group of people who had a private Zoom call with the man who was in charge of sorting the finance out, who eventually got fired, and I've forgotten his name. I'm sorry to say, but the way in which he described the financial crisis made one's blood freeze. The level of not only serious financially, but serious in terms of the web of people who looked like they might, but to use a phrase, not be playing with a straight bat.
Yeah.
and then there's the.
Was that Liberal alone? Sorry.
Yeah. Yes. It was. Yeah.
The ex-Auditor General. Yes.
That's right.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
And he's trying to clear his name. So one of the reasons why he's telling people about this is because he needs very badly, and he's perfectly entitled to clear his name. He was made a fall guy completely wrongly for that. So there's that. There's the dicasteries, and I'm very interesting, I guess, to see who he moves and who he keeps. AI, but we haven't got very long together. I know you've got another appointment. AI seems to me to be this lurking, terrible threat, because every so often I go on Twitter or YouTube and I see an artificial creation of someone supposedly saying something, and it isn't them, and they never said it. And it's very hard, even at this stage, to tell the difference. What is the Church going to do in the face of such a consummate capacity for lies to be told and put in the mouths of the wrong people? It strikes me it's going to. Well, it's going to be unbelievably difficult to tell the difference between truth and falsehood.
Yes, Pope Leo has been very strong on this, as we know. This is why he chose the name Leo, because Leo the 13th was discussing, of course, a lot about the Industrial Revolution. Now, as Leo the 14th, he wants to talk about this new Industrial Revolution, which is around AI. So yes, and he wants, I think, to bring in a rigorous ethical standard that protects human dignity, justice, and labour, and highlighting the risks, highlighting the advantages of AI, but also very much sort of bringing in the gospel message within it and bringing truth within it. And in some ways, you could argue, I suppose, that in the future, because there's so much untruth around, perhaps this gives an opportunity for the church to strengthen her proclamation of truths, the truth of the gospel, the truth of what we have as Catholics, in a world where it's just thirsting for it, and there's so much falseness around, so much untruth, as I say. So maybe this is an opportunity for the church to do that. One of the things I think, which I've noticed, and which actually was a very good commentary by, some people may know him, Abbé Claude Barthes. He's a French priest who wrote a little assessment of Pope Leo's pontificate so far, and he's spoken very strongly about the need for what he says, a return to the magisterial order to which the Church of Christ aspires and for which its pastors must prepare. He says that's a desperate need at the moment, to return to that, to return to the truths of the faith, to the divine revelation, especially at this time. He doesn't say this, but I think especially at this time when there is so much untruth around. So I think that this could be a opportunity, but also a very dangerous time too. And of course, Pope Leo's very aware of that too.
I hadn't thought of that, but I can see it now you mention it, that if the stakes are a sort of an adolescent relativism kicking against the parental authoritarianism of the Ancien Regime, there's something quite appealing about the let it all hang out and find your own truth thing. But the moment you move into a complete vacuum of truth and an absence or a negation of truth, then suddenly the foundations of reality that the church promises it represents become an antidote to chaos or to anarchy. So yes, I can see that whilst the challenges will be worse, the solution that the church offers could be even more welcome for some people. That's very helpful.
It's interesting too that Abbé Barthes also says in his piece, you can see it on Rorate Celis' website, he talks about how it seems as though Pope Leo wants to go along basically allowing all sides to have their say. So basically, as he calls it, appeasing tolerances, bridges can be built to welcome everybody without him having to take a position on the substance of any matter. Now, I think that can only be pursued probably for so long. It's going to be difficult to keep that position partly because of what I've said, that there isn't going to be a need for him to, obviously there is already, to proclaim truths and to affirm the faith in this very, this world of falsehood, let's say. Yeah.
I can see that as an interim measure, that might be a way of doing synodality. I mean, the problem with Francis's synodality was that it threatened to be a stalking horse to change the teaching of the church, and that was just exactly the same way as we saw Anglicans do in their general synod. We'd seen it all before. We knew what it meant. We saw where it was going, and we shouted, "Help! Help! Fire! Fire! Put the fire out!" But there are other ways of doing synodality. They're not. They don't all have to be as nefarious as that one looked like it might become. So this might be a kind of interim synodality where people at least feel they've been heard, even if they've not given the levers of doctrinal authority to change it. And then it may be that at that point he might adopt the role of an umpire and say, So, I mean, that would be a way of doing it. Well, I hope you're right. That would be cheering. I can't believe, do you think, I know he's used the word synodality, but again, I thought that was probably just him being linguistically flexible and calming down the liberals to save them from taking too many meds. But actually being perfectly aware that there are different ways of doing synodality, and some are constructive and others are destructive. You're entitled to choose.
Yes, no, I agree with you, Gavin. I think he's been a little bit lukewarm about synodality. He hasn't really said much about it. And when he went to visit the Synod Secretariat, he didn't stay very long. He gave a very, very short message to them.
That's why we need correspondence, because we wouldn't know that unless you were in a position to tell us. And as you say, that's really very significant. That's really important.
No, I think so too. And I think... and as I said, I mean, perhaps a little cynically, but I thought at the beginning of this pontificate. Maybe he's going to sort of Catholicize synodality in a way that it hadn't been before, because obviously people were very concerned about, letting in everybody and not really teaching anything. Maybe he's going to bring people in, but also at the same time bring back the teaching and say, this is what we believe. We're not just going to let things hang out. But we'll see. The signs aren't like that at the moment, but as you say, it could develop into that. I agree with you.
Well, I know you've got to go, and that strikes me as being a very hopeful note on which to end. So thank you very much for articulating it for us, and it's been really lovely to have you. Thank you for taking the time. Privilege for us. Bless you.
Great to meet you as always, Kevin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.